I was in the Army from 2010 to 13, and I was in Iraq in 2011. And I was in the infantry. And those are great questions. The segues to that, I guess I'll talk about that a little bit. You know, my experience was very much the Cub Scout, Boy Scout, you know, like the process, right? It's like pipeline. You know, as like a cisgendered white dude, I was like conditioned and expected to, in many ways, to fill these like specific roles. You know, the G.I. Joes, you know, watching these, you know, from cartoons to media. Yeah. So the way that I know we're using a lot of acronyms in the military can be kind of complicated to understand. I mean, I didn't know the first thing about it before I got in. So there's basically like these two channels of like, there's the commissioned, which are like the officers. There's like the dudes you salute, you know, and then there's enlisted, which is just kind of like everybody else. And historically, the way that structure was developed is like, the officers are people with access to education. You know, it'd be like the bourgeoisie, the higher class, would come down and like instruct the farm workers and the, you know, the poor folk and lead them into battle. So we still kind of follow those very basic like structures. And when we're talking about history, like, you know, when I was in the infantry, there's a few things I noticed, right? There was a disproportionate percentage of people of color, right, as it related to like the general population. There was a lot of people in there looking for citizenship, so there was a lot of immigrants. There was working class. Like nobody in my entire platoon, and I would dare, like with some degree of confidence, I could say my company, which is like 150 soldiers, come from like all working class families. You know, this is from like rural America, and so with that, you know, like holding that and thinking about what histories and what education and what knowledge did these different populations have when they made those decisions. So what informed those decisions for these different folks to get into those positions? I think those are some like really interesting questions, right? Because the histories that we learn and the knowledge that we carry with us, you know, I mean, obviously informs our decisions, but is not consistent, you know. So that was kind of an interesting note I had when I was first in. You know, I join up, do the whole training thing, got to Iraq, and there were some conflicts there, right? There was like, I think what, you know, we heard like Dan and Penny speak to is there is this like, there was a difference between my like lived experience, like what was actually happening, what I was seeing, and what the dominant narrative is telling me. You know, I know y'all are like 17, right? And this is like this initial invasion, shock and awe happened 16 years ago. So y'all were just like, you know, when it first went down, and the way that you know, the mainstream media, the powers that control those stories, you know, I'll just like kind of say the administration at the time was definitely like, you know, 9/11, we lost these towers, we're gonna go get them, you know, and then kind of like with like an alarming like casualness, it just like flowed from like, oh, actually it wasn't really the towers, we're going to like get out these weapons of mass destruction, right? And it was like less so about the actual agents of that attack, and it became more about getting these weapons away from like a very dangerous person. You know, and then like a few years later, after we get boots on ground, we're like, oh, okay, well maybe, you know, maybe there's not any weapons of mass destruction, and then like with the same ease, that story very easily turned into we're liberating the people against this this dictator. So like those are three very different stories, right? That like American society, myself, took very easily, and I kind of like, yeah. So those were like some questions, you know. I like, you know, what was that lived experience that really kind of made me more aware. Shock and awe was like this big thing to just destroy the infrastructure of the nation, right? Eliminating the ability of the government to govern, which means they were taking out like water and sewage and electricity and a lot of these, the infrastructure that was still being built up by the time I was there. So in 2011, we were doing this big drawdown, right? Everyone was pulling out. And I really wish, I could show some like of the videos and the footage I collected, but you're seeing these like massive, canals on both sides of the road that are just filled with like refuse and human waste, and in this same space, it's like the children of Iraq were just kind of like playing in and out of. I spoke to like the consequences of Agent Orange in Vietnam. In Iraq, we used this weapon, this ammunition called depleted uranium. And so there was massive areas, Basra is one specifically, where we were doing trials and just testing these ammunitions and then just kind of ditching them out in the sand. So now there's like an outrageous number of birth defects, and the people of Iraq are really suffering and will continue for a very long time to suffer the consequences of the uranium and the radiation. So I go there, and I'm like okay, I was having a hard time with my buddies when I was in. I had some more questions than the average infantryman, I guess. They don't like questions too much, but I was confused, right? Again, that narrative and that lived experience. I was like, well, wait, we're here, like all, I don't need to tell you, and I think that maybe I do. What we were attempting to share is this military culture, right? And the destruction and the threats and the oppression that exists inside of that culture was incredibly racist, right? Like people were like, fuck Iraqis, like these motherfuckers, like not having any nuance or any analysis or critique of what we were actually doing there. And as I engaged with the Iraqis more and more, I was like I learned a few things, and this is just my, my experience is the majority of the Iraqis I met weren't super stoked about us being there. They had been living under this occupation for about a decade at that point. And I was like attempting to like empathize for a moment, and try to put myself in a position of like these greater global politics coming to my home, my backyard, and being occupied by a foreign force of people that don't look like me, they don't talk like me, they don't believe in the same things I believe in, but here they are and they're killing my, over a decade, right? Uncles, fathers, sons, daughters, are lost in these like friendly fires and the casualties of war. We love to quote how many American service members were lost, and that's one of the dominant narratives, and some of the numbers that we don't even have are like the millions of Iraqis who had died, right, of people of Iraq and Afghanistan. Anytime we lose an American soldier, you see that on the top, right? You're like, oh, homeboy down, and we're never talking about those like hospitals that are getting airstrikes. So that made me ask a few things. I was like, I've been familiar with the concept of like, well, we're hearing a lot of words. I'm sure y'all are like super familiar with a lot of these words I think are really problematic. Terrorist, security. These very like kind of distant, a little arbitrary. Like it's hard to connect and actually understand what that means. And then like how the identity of a terrorist is like closely aligned or could be interchangeable with freedom fighter, right? So going back to that story of people in my backyard, if I saw armored tanks coming down the road, I want to fight them. You know what I mean? I'm probably going to be like, hey, don't like do that to my mom, And so I really started to actually see myself in a different way, and I saw my participation as a terrorist. I mean, as we were, engaging in those ways. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, probably a duck. So yeah, more questions I was thinking about when I was over there. I guess I could talk a little. So, I think Penny mentioned the military-industrialized complex, and I'm not sure if y'all are super familiar with that. But it's kind of like the system that's developed right now, which is a product of financially incentivizing war. And that there are industries and there's careers and very, very wealthy people in power who are motivated to perpetuate and continue to see war exist regardless of the cost or the purpose. Those are the same people who are funding those NFL, the propaganda that we see all the time. I don't know, I'm kind of floundering right now, y'all.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you seem 5 years removed from it now, or I guess going on 6 years removed, at least able to say, I was fulfilling a role that somebody would call a terrorist.
Yeah.
Maybe not in 2011, you were sort of coming to that, or at least asking, is that me? And now you seem okay, or not okay, obviously, but able to say, yes, that label could have been slapped on me, and that's a fair judgment. I'm wondering, within your platoon or company, how widespread that attitude is. You said you're an outlier in terms of asking more questions than the average grunt, but how, especially because public opinion had turned so much against it by 2011, or at least it was heading that way, how common is it, or do you think you're still an outlier in being willing to say, yeah, I was kind of a bad guy, or doing bad guy things, versus people clinging to the hero narrative just because they can't psychically handle thinking otherwise?
I think you nailed it at the end there, of the in my experience, with the guys that I had served with and deployed with, a lot of them, like I said, there was that conflict in my lived experience and narrative where I was like, man, it just doesn't fit right. And I think a lot of my buddies kind of hold on to, really depend on believing that what they did was right. The more I realize the error of my actions, the more it's affected my heart. So this kind of goes into we hear a lot about post-traumatic stress. We heard a little bit about moral injury, and I think that the more a person understands the destruction that they had caused or the damage and the more weight you're carrying, on your conscience and on your heart. So I think that a lot of these guys are holding on to that like a shield. They're holding on to the belief that what they did was right, because if that is not the case, then you kind of have to come to a similar conclusion of what I had. And that's not an easy place to get to. Was that kind of?
And I wonder if you would speculate, this idea of toxic masculinity has been going around in my head a lot lately.
Right.
And I wonder if the messages we give boys.
I think in my personal experience, I kind of had I've always seen the world through a different framework because, well, I'm gay, right? So I've had to challenge those things, and I think that in my unit, it was kind of a gift in a lot of ways, right? Where I had kind of a better understanding of what it is to be a man, masculinity, femininity, the way that patriarchy exists inside. The way I'm demonizing feminine characteristics. So those are things I kind of carried with me before I was there. It was very much an act of, it was that patriotic, I want to do the service thing, but it was misdirected. But I was also hungry. I'm not gonna I needed a job. I was doing wildland firefighting. It was a poor year or two. I was hurting. I needed work. And I think that's the case. We kind of talked about class a little bit, right? Where are these communities coming from that are filling the grunt roles? And in fact, I don't think that emotional vocabulary is available. I don't think that a lot of the guys I had served with are really there's no pressure to, they don't need to. A lot of them are already sitting in positions of privilege and just kind of hiding inside of that. I think that embracing oppressive structures is also harmful to ourselves. And I think that it doesn't, they're no better off in this hiding world. But they do have the luxury of escaping, of avoiding the consequences because